Shot 68, take one. Yeah, that's where I'd say there's a lot of crossover, particularly in something like advertising. When you're a creative in an advertising agency, say you're making a television ad, you use all those disciplines. You can imagine there's a sound aspect, there's filmic visual aspect. You know, you might have to even do a poster or something like that, like a completely static visual medium.
What are you doing?
I fell out of a plane.
I think I compartmentalise what I do creatively a little bit. I do a very commercial, creative job during the day, and then there's kind of art, and I just compartmentalise them because there is a difference between doing what I would say is an applied commercial art compared to doing art, and it's about the freedoms of each, and probably partly the reason I do a lot of art is because it's the opposite of what I do when I work for a client. You know, as soon as you work for a client, you have a responsibility to they're the master, really. You're sort of serving them. It's a bit like being a session musician. You know, if you were like the guitar player for Lionel Richie or something, you would have to serve Lionel Richie's songs and his style, you know, because he's the guy paying the money, and it's his, you know, it's his gig. Attractiveness of a job like a creative job like that, where you get paid, you do get a bit of both worlds. I get to do that and get, you know, to make a living out of it, and sometimes it almost feels like I'm doing it for myself at best. You know, I'd almost do it free. Don't say that too loud, but you know, it's really enjoyable and very close to what it feels like to just go out and make some art. You know, the freedom of making art without any rules. Sometimes it feels like that. Sometimes it's very in sync with what someone would want to do personally. It's a kind of, if you did a graph, you know, there's freedom and there's kind of making money, and they tend to, you know, as soon as you start making money, you tend to lose your freedom. You know, in a sort of, if you live in a capitalist society, there seems to be that dynamic, you know. So if you want freedom, that's great. You can go and make art, and but don't initially, at least, expect to get paid much for it or anything for it. You know, you're doing it for the love of art. So and I kind of go and do that, and I don't really think about success or money or any of those things. I just do art for the pure pleasure of it, almost as a relief to doing this very commercial thing.
Begin acting now, please. And action. Action, sir.
I'm eating.
I like that. That's good. Keep it rolling. Keep going. Very good. Very natural. Very good. Hold it. Gentlemen, keep your focus. Focus.
I probably started making some TV stuff like quite early on, but maybe 10 years into my career or something, I started working on this beer account, you know, Foster's, and me and my partner Grant Rutherford wrote an ad called The Big Ad for Carlton Draft, which became kind of, I don't know, at the time it was like the #1 Australian ad or something, and it's been named as ad of the decade sometimes in certain magazines and that kind of thing. So I guess that's definitely the kind of biggest thing I've done, and some would say that as an advertising person, like in Adland, people know me for that ad. So, and in fact, it was like years of ads really. I worked on that account for at least 10 years, if not longer. So I did a bunch of work on that account and other beer ads as well. I worked on that Carlton Draft account very much, at least initially, at the time when television was still kind of the be-all and end-all of advertising. And but since, you know, I mean, what really came in and changed everything was the internet. So now we tend to write these, what they would call an integrated campaign that might live mainly on the internet, might be a website or something like that, and might have a television aspect to it, might have a print aspect to it, might have a PR part to it. These kind of much less centralized ideas. They have to be quite big ideas that can live in all these different media. Something like T.A.C. Graham is probably a good example of that, where I guess the heart of it was was actually was a sculpture, was the heart of it. You know, it was a three-dimensional thing, and then it had a website. It had little films connected to it. It's like a web of, excuse the pun, but a web of touch points, they would call them, you know, in advertising. So, and that's much, you know, it's a very interesting time where you can use all those media. It's a kind of exciting time for creative people where they can use social media, make games, use VR, you know, virtual reality or augmented reality. There's just so much there's so much tech out there, there's so many media out there that you could utilize to tell a story these days. I think perhaps I would be a musician, but that's probably the thing I'm least qualified to do, like, out of everything I can do. But it's probably it's a very pure, artistic, mysterious thing, music, that I love doing. Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint. Like, I feel like I understand what painting is, you know, but music's kind of an enigma. You know, it doesn't even, music in some ways doesn't even really exist, you know, unless it's a temporal thing that kind of only exists in time. And, you know, if you're in a vacuum in space, you couldn't even hear it, you know. It's a very mysterious thing. I can't look at music in the same way I can look at painting and kind of understand it. There are all these, it's like a black box a little bit. Can't see my face in my shoes. Can't bear to see my face in my shoes.